So, Luisa, you've been listening to these space people give their spacey talks, and I wonder what you've been hearing. What would you, have you made any reflections?
Very many. Mm-hmm. Like, we need to talk so much. Like, you made all the points that I'm trying to make all the time. So good to have both science and experience to emphasize that. I'm also gonna stand beside because I'm. Like, if I had to choose one point, it's the thing that Eva mentioned about getting the design of the space and taking the space into account higher on the agenda when designing experiences, because I recognize that very much. It's like, when we've covered everything else, then maybe we can scrounge a bit of money for doing something real with the budget, or like with the design of the space. So that's a reflection. I was wondering if you experience the same with the more, even if you have the science, do you still have to fight?
Yeah, I think the difficulty, I think the difficulty is that, at least for what I do, while the science is there, it hasn't really seeped into everyday life. And I think today we're seeing the difference where companies are actually paying for employee health and understanding that health is important. Now the next step is to look at how does something like that influence things like meetings. And when you do get into the components of, well, actually, if the light were better, I would focus better and be more productive. And combined with all of it, then the result would be really different. So.
One thing that struck me with the combination of these talks is that the later you do something, and this is of course true of everything in a design process, the later you try to solve a problem, the more expensive it is. So choosing, at some point those walls have been painted, and the cost of colored paint is only marginally higher than the cost of white paint or beige paint. So at that point it would have been essentially free. It's only when you try to do it last that it becomes a burden. Yeah.
But I also think it's important to have an idea with a space. So actually, I don't need that big a budget, because I could also have done like something out in the foyer where you could place those sticks. So you would take this experience and you would make a space out of it afterwards. Mm-hmm. So you could use those elements like small sticks just to do a scenography that would kind of mark or signal what this is. Conference is about. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking against my point that you should really prioritize and use to spend money on it. But you should spend money on the idea or the meaning of the space. So a concept could really solve it.
And money and time can also be interchanged at favorable exchange rates.
And if I could add to that, I think that's a really great coupling of where what we do merges. And the concept is really important. So I actually, unlike you, prefer to be in super early stage, because it's less for me about the actual visuals, but more about things like, the space of the room, the airflow, the heat, how many people, all of these things affect what you're going to do in the space. Ask any of the technicians. I came in here yesterday and asked the weirdest questions. And it's important because if you think about a conference specifically, what is the temperature going to be like where people are sitting? If it's too hot, they can't focus. Mm. And that's just another example.
We know it's a bit cold, we're working on it.
Yeah. And also in the Nordic countries, this is, or anywhere in the world that has either extreme temperatures or seasons, this is a real problem. In so many public spaces here, they forget that we have winter, which is very strange because winter is a big part of the year. So when you go to the movies or anything like that, you're going to be carrying your clothes around for a big part of the thing. That means that you, for instance, don't have hands free to have for a wine glass and some finger food, if that's what you're trying to do with your event. And these should be very fundamental things. And already there, somehow, the lived experience is disconnected from obviously active choices are not being made, I think. I'd like to let the audience in. Let's try and start with questions. Questions are recognized from the fact that they typically start with a question word like why or how, and then they have a question mark at the end. And if you want to emphasize it, you can go up with your voice so that it sounds like a question. That means that if you have a statement, this is not the time for your statement. Do you have a question? Yes, we have one right here.
Because I'm going to try to act like a grown-up now. It's not going to be easy for me. So interesting to hear you guys, women, or how I should call you, hens, like we say in Sweden. Hen is a new word. Anyway, the question is, I'm thinking about, you know, the most critical place is hospitals. We know that we want people to get well, and you're supposed to get healthy, and still they look so weird. Have you worked anything with hospitals? Because there it's obvious. This is the objective. You're supposed to get well.
So
you're needed there.
Shall I answer?
Yes.
So sorry for repeating this sentence over and over again. It's an incredibly complex problem, and I only delved into just one aspect of it. You know, it goes much further. So everything everyone was mentioning here, like the experience, so how you funnel people in, go people out. One of the other things, you know, with healthcare, what I think is really interesting is that if you look at the fundamental problem of why do people go? Do people go because they could go because they're sick, but they could go because they need a human contact. You know, that's for a lot of people, that's their major point of human contact. And so if you start dissecting the problem in terms of an emotional sense and then address it in an emotional sense. But for your specific question of a hospital, I think there's a couple ways that I would right now segment it. Obviously, there's the using things to make people feel better. So making the lighting different, using smell to help render pain, using things like pleasant pictures or dogs that you can pet, or having sound in a room that just kind of calms you down. And there's a ton of science about what those choices could be, and then combining it together to make the experience function. The caveat, so the tricky thing is that while there's an important biological aspect to how your senses function, how you understand it, there also is an aspect of experiential to it. So if you were have a really big trauma and vanilla is supposed to make you happy because most people tend to like it, if your trauma happens at the time of you smelling vanilla, you're going to be freaked out by vanilla. That's kind of one short.
And the surgery, for instance, would be, per definition, a major trauma as well, at least if you're conscious. And even if you're not, so it also you can also reprogram things when you're trying to help, as well as accidentally re-trigger things.
But so it doesn't actually have to be a traumatic incident. So trauma there's also science behind this. Trauma is increased if you're more stressed. So stress is one of these like critical things to think about. It decreases healing time. It makes you feel more pain. It's actually, when you look at your blood, it mimics illness in the body, which is really interesting. Your white blood cells go up, your sleep patterns change, your eating habits change, and you kind of become more recluse. So,
I have a horrible example. It's also from a hospital, that they had this conversation room where you could go and talk with the doctor, and often you would get a diagnosis in there. And in this room, at the cancer department, they had an image of a bold person hanging. So what kind of stories would you...
bold person.
Bold person, bold person. So in this room you would get your diagnosis being a cancer patient. So it's really like, what kind of story do I start to tell myself about me being sick and this is my destiny, instead of giving hope or tell another story with the space. And I think it's really hard also to use pictures or images, because they should open up and be maybe more abstract, so we could project our stories into them. But sometimes it's nice to control it in a way, in a positive way.
I mean, I can actually add some science to that, if you like. So,
briefly,
yes, it's the story, but there's a ton of science saying that you mimic your environment. So if you're surrounded by sick people, you'll be sick. That's one part. Sure.
Yes.
I think most of us recognize the rooms that you ever showed, the classrooms or the workplaces and the meeting rooms. What do you suggest? Any suggestion of what to do when you come in from the outside and you don't own the room and you're supposed to be there for X hours and create an atmosphere of creativity and braveness and interaction, and you don't own the room? You can't be there before and you can't change too much. What do you do?
What I do, the first, when I enter a room, I orientate, of course, and then I recognize how the furniture is positioned, and then I start to move it over. So it's ready that I can stay in the room and I can use it for whatever I want to use it for. And it's very easy to change the positions. You can move tables, you can move them together, but I really need to prepare the room to the process or the work I'm doing there. And it has become like a natural reaction for me to do that. I also do it in hotels. So.
Luisa was nodding. You do the same thing.
Exactly the same. I do the same, and I would encourage you to do it as well. Even if it is like you're arriving in a meeting and you don't really have the time before, because that's also the case sometimes. Like you have access to the room 5 minutes before, you still have time. Or you can just, everyone enters at the same time and you can say, let's, like, help me move this and then we'll work
But could you
together.
bring something? I'm thinking like light filters or scent, I don't know, yeah.
So I do that. I do the furniture stuff too, because movement and position is really important. You said creativity and interaction, so body position and movement really influences how you interact with people. More science later. On the senses, there are a lot of things you can do with light. So for creativity, I don't know offhand what you could do for light. For focus, bright light is important, and specifically you want differentials in light. So you want to have a light behind whatever you're doing, and there's a lot of studies that show that brighter classrooms are helpful. So you can bring your lights with you. You can use smell, so if you're teaching, different scents can boost creativity or focus, and what you want to do is maybe pick one topic and kind of go with it and introduce it in 15 minutes rotation, so you don't have, those are just 2 examples.
But you also need to invent your style or your way of doing it, so it doesn't, you can't get like this instruction that you can do this and this and this. It's like to start to experiment with your environments, to add a little sound or the smell, or, and then you will get this whole suitcase of tools you can use.
Actually, that specifically, like, prepare your kit for stuff that you can transform a room with. Like the old boring way to do it is to come rolling in your roll up and drag it up, right? That's the very simple way to do it. It can still work. But what is your, like, what is the bag that is by the door in your office that when you go out you take that with you? Is it like pink umbrellas to put in everyone's water glasses or whatever it is? That's a weird idea, but yeah.
And that is an idea that naturally leads us into the next thing. Thank you very much. Eva Wendelboe, Kuczynski, Veronika, Bartosch, and Luisa Carbonelli.